as Bobby mentioned, he wrote the first People's History of the United States, really giving a true account of what happens in this country and where we come from. He's been an activist on nuclear issues and on energy issues for over 40 years. He also was one of very few people who predicted the election fraud that Bobby has documented in Rolling Stone magazine. Harvey predicted it before it happened, documented those predictions, and that helped inspire Bobby and others to follow up afterwards and speak out and speak truth on those issues. He's a leading activist on election issues and one of this country's first great progressive activists, and we're honored to have him here tonight. I really appreciate him coming out, and so let's give a warm welcome for Harvey Wasserman.
No nukes, you got it. Well, thank you so much. It's really, really amazing to be here tonight. I got to tell you, 16 years ago, I was invited to become senior advisor to Greenpeace. And when I got to their first big party, I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. It was like joining the world's greatest kids club. Imagine a kids club with a Navy that goes all over the world. But now meeting you guys, I realize I'm in the world's greatest butt kicker club. Walking and talking with Bobby yesterday, he's an amazing guy. It's an incredible situation that we have here with this group and with his activism. And I want to tell you basically how I got involved. For some reason, I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. I was actually born in Boston. Every minute that I lived there, I wondered what the hell I was doing there. When people ask me why I live in Columbus, Ohio, I say it's because I love the ocean and the mountains. And then they say, well, there aren't any there. And I say what Bogey said in Casablanca, which is, well, I was misinformed. But the fact of the matter is that I was lucky enough through my early years to be involved with a news service called Liberation News Service. Anybody remember that one? If you remember the 60s, by the way, you weren't there. Now that we're in our 60s, some of us, it's even harder. But I'm going to tell you in the first part why and how J. Edgar Hoover became the godfather of the anti-nuclear movement. This is an amazing story, and every bit of it is true. As Lissa can tell you, she was with me when it happened. We had a radical news service called the Liberation News Service, and we sent all these great articles to the underground papers around the world that nobody would cover. Sound familiar? It's the same as the internet today, and I'll get to that with the stolen election. But our Liberation News Service, which they all discounted as being ineffective, was in fact infiltrated by the FBI, by the old COINTELPRO operation that J. Edgar Hoover set around to doing. And these FBI agents, and we documented their presence in the 70s. It's one of those conspiracy theories that's actually true. We have the FOIA documents. We actually have a document with J. Edgar Hoover's handwriting on it. They put a fake article out into the underground press, and it had all those four-letter words in it. And he writes in, well, do we have to really use words like these? And the FBI agent writes back, yeah, that's how these people talk. I guess they had anthropologists on their staff. But anyway, so they succeeded in busting up our news service, except we pulled a fast one on them. I want to thank the late, great George Harrison, because in the middle of all this, the Beatles gave us their film Magical Mystery Tour to show as a benefit at the Fillmore East in Lower Manhattan. And we took, unbeknownst to the other side, which was the FBI side, we like to call them, although they don't like to hear that, believe me, and not all of them were FBI, but we took the first $5,000 in ticket sales, and we went up to Western Massachusetts, and we bought a farm. Sort of the typical thing you do with proceeds from without telling the other side of the organization. But, nonetheless, we went up and we bought this beautiful farm. And that's when we became environmentalists. We were all suburban, organic, hippie farmers. We didn't know much about farming, but the first decision we made when we got to Montague Farm, this beautiful piece of property in Western Massachusetts, was we decided to farm without chemicals. We didn't really know why we were going to do it, but we became organic farmers. And we helped, inadvertently, we helped start the organic farming movement, at least among our generation. We actually visited by the great Rob Rodale from Organic Farming Magazine, who called us the new peasants. Would not sample the mescaline, but it was okay. He still had a good time. And as a result of this, we were there basically because J. Edgar Hoover split our news service. And so we're sitting up there, and by the way, all those stories that you've heard about those 1960s communes, absolutely true. Everyone, don't even think about it. Lisa will testify she was there, or she won't, you know. Anyway, so we had a fabulous time, and going into the early 1970s, things started to slow down. We were anti-warriors. We were used to being the adrenaline rush. Suddenly we were out in the country. We were watching the grass grow. We were learning about the environment. We were learning about slowing down. And suddenly, thankfully, guess what happened? The local utility company came in and said they were going to build a nuclear plant 4 miles from our house. We were thrilled. And luckily, we had someone on the farm, which was me, who was an expert in nuclear power, because I had done a report on it in 9th grade, which was based on Our Friend the Atom by Walt Disney, which I had gotten from my bar mitzvah, and which was basically our source book for starting the anti-nuclear movement. So we got together, and you know, I've heard some of your stories, not all of them. I've heard some of your stories about how you've taken nothing and turned it into a movement, and you've won these fantastic victories. And I can testify that that has been done. And it's just so gratifying to hear what you've all been doing about that, because it is possible, and I've seen it happen. And what happened on our farm was, we were just a bunch of hippies on the hill. And the utility comes in there, and they figure they've moved into a rural community. They're not going to have any opposition. The plant was worth actually more than the entire assessed value of the town. And they figured nobody's going to try and stop them. Well, they didn't understand that we were there. And the first thing that happened was we revived our news service, and actually the words "no nukes" went through my little 1927 Underwood typewriter first. It was I should have, if I'd have trademarked it, I'd be treating you all to dinner, actually. And then what they did was they put a 500-foot weather tower up at the site of the plant. Now, I'm not recommending you do this or anything like this. And you got to remember, this was the 70s, and we were a lot younger. But they put up this 500-foot weather tower, and suddenly, on Washington's birthday, who could imagine it fell down? And then there was this guy from my farm, and I could not make this name up, Sam Lovejoy, who ran to the road in Montague and flagged down the first car, which happened to be a police car, and took it to the police station and said, "Hey, I just knocked over the weather tower." And they tested his breath and you know, looked in his eyes and asked him what drug he was on. And then they sent the police car back to where the tower had been, and he hears them radio into the police station, "My God, an airplane has crashed into the tower." Well, what Sam had actually done was he'd gone to the tower, and it was held up by 21 guy wires. And he was the only one on our farm with any mechanical ability, and he had unfastened 3 of the 21 guy wires. Didn't know how many he'd have to do, but after the third one went flinging out into the cyberspace, the tower came crashing down. He ran to the local police station, as I said, handed them a statement, got in front of the judge the next day and said, "Listen, I did this. I'm going to stand trial. We don't want any nuclear plants in our backyard. It'll fuck up our organic garden." There are many attorneys here tonight, and I will tell you without explaining in great detail, you can ask me afterwards, Sam was acquitted. He got in front of a judge, and he told the judge all these things, and basically they charged him with the wrong crime. Without going into detail, they charged him with a felony. It turned out to be that destruction of real property in Massachusetts is a misdemeanor, and they let him go, and we found out later that the jury would have acquitted him anyway. And this was the beginning of our No Nukes movement. And I'm going to tell you about the Montague nuclear plant. They never got the first bulldozer into the site. The Montague nuclear power plant site, which is on the Connecticut River, they were going to build it right on top of an aquifer which fed 3/4 of the river, water into the river and purified it. It would have killed the river. If that plant had been built, everything south of it would have been utterly radiated and decimated. That place where they were going to build the plant is now a nature conservancy. And you can go there and you can walk and you can see the river, and it is absolutely beautiful. And that was the start of the anti-nuclear movement. And when we first started that, at least the grassroots anti-nuclear movement in the United States, there's a great and wonderful scientist who lives here in San Francisco named John Goffman, who left the Atomic Energy Commission to warn us of the dangers. He had a book published. He paid a terrible price, as whistleblowers have over the years. I want to honor his work. Another scientist named Ernest Sternglass. As you know, we have a history of whistleblowers and all these attempts to save the environment, but the anti-nuclear movement could not have happened without scientists like these. They made it all possible. When we first went fighting the Montague nuclear plant, about 90% of the American public, including much of the left, supported nuclear power. There was no reason to believe in people's minds in general that we should oppose nuclear power. It didn't occur to people until we started pointing out small details like radioactive emissions, like meltdowns, like terrorist attacks, which I'm going to talk a little more about, like inefficiencies, and like destruction of rivers and lakes and streams and oceans that they sit these things on. So in that year, 1974, Richard Nixon got on. Remember him? I actually saw a bumper sticker out here in Marin the other day. It says, "I never thought I'd miss Richard Nixon." Hard to believe, but true. At any rate, Nixon got on national television and said there'd be 1,000 nuclear plants in the United States by the year 2000. That would have been about 20 per state. In California, it would have been 100, 150 or so. I did have the honor, by the way, along the road of doing 3 nights in the San Luis Obispo County Jail. I highly recommend it. It's very comfortable. The food isn't too good, but the company was great. That was in 1984, and a long time ago, but we made our dent. But Nixon said 1,000 nuclear plants by the year 2000. In the year 2000, there were 103. That's 103 too many. And had it not been for the anti-nuclear movement, I guarantee you, most, if not all, of those 1,000 nuclear plants would have been built. Now, I want to tell you something about one of the groups, the Riverkeepers in New York. You're fighting the Indian Point nuclear plant. It is the one. It is the most dangerous. There are more people within a 10-mile radius of the Indian Point nuclear plant than any other. And I'm going to be a little somber here, because unlike normal people, on September 11, 2001, I first had the reaction, what a terrible thing, 3,000 people killed, the World Trade Centers. The second reaction I had was, thank God they didn't hit Indian Point. Yeah. Because if that jet that hit the World Trade Center, the first one, had dived down 1 minute earlier into the Indian Point nuclear complex, which has 2 active reactors, one retired, 2 or 3 spent fuel pools, they would not have had to crack the containment. They would not have had to break through those domes. All they would have had to do was put out the cooling systems, put out the control room, do loose off-site communication, whatever the hell they wanted to do. I guarantee you we would have had a meltdown, a multiple meltdown at Indian Point. You don't want to hear the potential consequences. However, you can, if you want to, pick up the most recent issue of, dare I say it, Hustler magazine, which is the only place I can get this kind of stuff published, which lays out, one good benefit is they send me the magazine. I don't have to say I bought it. But they did put out the nightmare scenario. Instead of 3,000 people being killed, we'd be talking about 300,000 or maybe 3 million, without exaggeration. Instead of a couple $1 billion worth of damage, we'd be talking about the end of the American economy. You're talking about trillions of dollars worth of damage. And this administration, which is allegedly so focused on stopping terrorism, is continuing to operate these insane nuclear plants. Every fucking reactor in this country should have a big bullseye on it that says terrorist attack. None of them can be protected. Not one of them. And you don't want to hear an hour's worth of the consequences of what might happen. It is worse than Hiroshima and Nagasaki, worse than Chernobyl. It would be the worst thing that ever happened on this planet. And of course, all our rivers, lakes, streams, oceans would be finished kaput. So thank you so much, Riverkeepers in New York, for fighting to shut Indian Point. We've got to do it, and it's got to happen fast. All this horseshit. Sorry. Nonsense about reviving nuclear power. I got to tell you, I've been in this a long time. Every time they talk about reviving nuclear power, there's an accident. They did it in 1979, just before 3 Mile Island, and I will tell you, and by the way, I'm going to talk about Bobby's while I'm here. I went into the 3 Mile Island area in 1980 on assignment from Rolling Stone. And I went in there to write an article about the psychological impacts of the accident. And when I got there, I thought I was in the middle of a Japanese science fiction movie. People were dropping dead. Animals were dying in droves. Anybody that tells you that nobody died at 3 Mile Island is repeating the biggest lie told in American industrial history. That plant killed thousands of people. That accident, to this day, they do not know how much radiation escaped, or where it went, or who ingested it, or who died or is dying from it. I will tell you, since so many of you are attorneys, that there was a class action suit filed in the 1980s on behalf of 2,400 families in the central Pennsylvania area who believed they and their family members were harmed, with good reason, by the radiation from that accident. The federal justice so-called system has not allowed that trial to be heard. That accident was in 1979. There has still yet to be a trial in the court system on damages from that plant. And we have people dying in droves, I guarantee you. The judge, Sylvia Rambo, a federal judge, says there's not enough evidence to show that they were harmed, therefore they can't have a trial. And that situation is in place today. The most famous industrial accident in American history, and there has still yet to be any semblance of justice for the people downwind. It is unbelievably bad. Terrible. And the idea of reviving nuclear power, they might as well try and refloat the Titanic. This is not a new technology. We have 50 years of proven technology. And with this schmuck, Patrick Moore, who allegedly was with Greenpeace, this is like, you know, your herbal tea that you dip in and come out. He was in Greenpeace for like 10 minutes, and now he's made a career of lending Greenpeace's name to nuclear power and every other polluter that will pay him. It's a terrible situation. It may happen to you at some point in time. I don't know. I generally oppose the death penalty, but I suppose in some cases I can make an exception. But this is bad stuff, and there is no excuse for any justification for trying to revive nuclear power to fight global warming or for any other reason. So it's a myth, it's nonsense, and it's a lie. So I applaud the Riverkeepers and any other organization here, represented here that's fighting nuclear power. If you've got a nuclear plant in your backyard, keep an eye on it. It is destroying your river, lake, stream, ocean, whatever you've got, and they have to be shut down. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the alternatives in a minute. Now, the other big part of my life, after fighting nuclear power at Montague and all these other things, I wound up going back to Ohio to deal with, that's a song, isn't it? To deal with my folks, my parents, which turned out to be a good thing. And once again, I went through 20 years of angst. I grew up here, I vowed never to come back. What am I doing here again? Well, I found out in 2004, at least in karmic things, what I was doing there again. And that is in my backyard, in the neighborhood where I grew up, and in the neighborhood where I now live, I saw the 2004 election stolen. There is absolutely no doubt about it. We watched it happen. In the neighborhood where I grew up, black people waited 5 hours in line to vote. They cast their votes, and their votes were thrown in the trash. Guaranteed. In my neighborhood, in the little white, middle-class, somewhat liberal town of Bexley, there were Republican challengers telling people that they couldn't vote. I went to vote this time. Actually, I am now a registered Republican. They have open primaries in Columbus, in Ohio, and I went in to vote in the Republican primary because J. Kenneth Blackwell was running in the primary. I wanted to vote against the guy against him. They almost didn't let me register as Republican. I guess there's a dress code. But the voting machines now are electronic, which we know are rigged, and they stand this high, and there's no voting booth. And the people running the voting place can see how you vote. Now, I'm not going to go into the sordid details. We did write this book, which I happen to have, and I've got a bunch of books here. So I always forget this. I do have books to sell. They're $10 each, and this is one of them. How the GOP Stole America's 2004 Election and is rigging 2008. This is what I sent to Bobby that helped get him going on the Rolling Stone piece. And I will tell you that it was, again, there was a huge accomplishment for him to get that piece published. And one of the reasons I brought up 3 Mile Island was when I went into 3 Mile Island and wrote my story about how people were dying because of the radiation from the nuclear plant, Rolling Stone wouldn't publish it. And I had, I fought them for months and months and months and months. And we had the documentation and we had the evidence and we had everything a journalist could ever want, and they would not publish that story. And when Bobby started to do this story from Rolling Stone, I said, man, it's going to take everything you got. This is what happened to me. And he got it in. So I am doubly honoring the accomplishment of getting that piece published, because it was no small deal. And to this day, by the way, no mainstream publication has put forward the fact that people were killed at 3 Mile Island. You can't read it in the Times, you can't read it in the Post, you can't read it anywhere except on the internet and in some stuff that has come out of the anti-nuclear movement. So this is a huge deal that Bobby got this published in Rolling Stone, and it's got into the mainstream media. And Jim and Mary Beth and other people have, really there's I won't call them river keepers, I guess we're election keepers or democracy keepers, who are devoting full time to trying to revive what's left of our election system. It has been decimated. Now, I don't want to make people depressed or anything. Look, you know, we got this right to vote in the American Revolution at Valley Forge. I teach U.S. history, so I can go on about this stuff. You know, at Gettysburg, it is part of our American heritage. We are Americans. We grew up with the right to vote. We have taken it for granted for way too long. And the fact of the matter is we're going to have to fight for it. But I will guarantee you right now, the 2000 election was stolen. There were 3 Senate races in 2002 that were stolen. The presidential election race was stolen in 2004. We had a referendum issue stolen in 2005. We had a congressional race stolen in Ohio in 2005. And this election in San Diego that just happened was also stolen. I guarantee you the Democratic woman won. I am stunned and shocked and appalled that she conceded. So we cannot have these Democrats conceding like this. And I went and saw I spoke on a panel afterwards at the Al Gore movie, and I think it's a great movie, but he lost me at the very beginning because he was the candidate in 2000. And he got up there and he's allowed to do this personally. He said, well, you know, I put it behind me now. We can't put that shit behind us. That's democracy. If you ever lose your anger, just go back and read Bush v. Gore. You know, I mean, this was a theft. And I was working with a guy on this, and you know, me and I'm lucky I have a great co-conspirator in Columbus I write with, and we're just going on and on about how important this is. And he says, this guy was says, hey man, this isn't the Civil War, but you know what? It is the Civil War. This is the most important thing that's happened in this country in the last 50 years, the theft of these 2 elections. I mean, I was talking to Bobby yesterday. I think there will be a great theological debate in the decades to come about whether Bush is the Antichrist or whether it's Karl Rove. One or the other. You know, which one is it? I don't know. But we know, I don't have to describe to you the depth of the sickness of this regime. And the ultimate sickness of it is that this is not an elected government. These guys were not elected President of the United States, and their regime is as illegitimate as Pinochet's or Somoza's or any other third world dictatorship that the CIA creeps put into power. So I don't mean that idly. We have a job to do here. You know, we grew up in a democracy. We all study about Jefferson and Franklin and Washington and Lincoln, and the more I read about these guys, the more amazed I am. I mean, our democracy was won by small farmers and by merchant seamen and working class people in Boston and other cities, and it was fought for with 620,000 people who died in the Civil War to end slavery, and it was defended in World War II against the ultimate Nazi evil. And we have a great history in this country. It's mixed. It has lots of problems, all that stuff, you know. Read Howard Zinn's People History of the United States. It's dead accurate. But the fact of the matter is that we grew up in a democracy, and we have come to take it for granted, and we don't have it anymore. And part of the reason is, and we got to hold these guys. I keep imagining myself in a public meeting and getting to ask Al Gore this question and have all these people in the audience shouting me down. But if Al Gore ever turns up in your neighborhood and he shows the film and he gets accolades and all that stuff, you got to ask him, hey man, you know, it's nice that you feel better about 2000, but we don't. And we've got these guys in the White House, and they are catastrophic, and they have to be dealt with, and we are not going to make a change in this country until we get our electoral system back. Now, that doesn't mean that the only way we can make change is to elect new people into government. That's not necessarily the only way we do it, and you are all living proof of that. There's no doubt about it. There are other ways to make social change. But it's an important one, and it's ingrained in our democratic fiber, and it has been ripped out and poisoned and turned to some very, very dangerous stuff. These guys, as you well know, are not to be underestimated, and I'm not kidding when I say that Bush or Rove is the Antichrist. There is nothing that they haven't done to destroy this planet. I mean, we are in a serious problem here, and we can't think about an easy way of getting rid of them in 2006 and 2008 without getting these Democrats to stop conceding these elections. It can't continue to happen. So, and the one thing, I got to mention this specifically, being a historian, Al Gore did one thing that I will hesitate to say it's unforgivable, but he's got to come to account for it. There is a law in the books which we exercised in 2004, which says that the delegation from to the Electoral College from any state can be challenged on the floor of the Congress with a letter from a single congressperson and a single senator. And it happened in 2004, thanks to Barbara Boxer, the senator, and thank you very much, Barbara, and Stephanie Tuck Jones from Cleveland. Now, in 2000, it was about to happen, and as you saw in Michael Moore's 9/11, the Black Caucus was furious about what happened in Florida. And they wanted to use this law to challenge the Florida delegation, and they could not get a senator. Now, Paul Wellstone was a personal friend of mine. He was an amazing guy, and I still have serious questions about how he died. It was one of the worst days of my life, and of everybody's life. I mean, he was an incredible piece of our democracy. But my understanding is that Paul Wellstone wanted, in 2000, to join the Black Caucus and challenge the Florida delegation, which it should have been challenged, and that Al Gore told him from the podium, he was President of the Senate as Vice President of the United States, that he would not recognize the senator to join in that challenge. Now, that is one of the great unanswered questions in our democracy. There are very few more important questions to be answered than that one. So if you are in a room with Al Gore, as you may be, ask him, and I'll give you my email, tell me what he says, will you please? Because that question has to be answered. But the bottom line is, we have a serious problem. And it's a problem that we can deal with. There are other problems that we've dealt with in this country. We will deal with this problem. We have to get back our electoral system. And anybody that tells you that it's not broken is not paying attention. I was there at ground zero. I saw it happen in Ohio. I can tell you, or you can read about 100 different ways that they did it. In Florida 2000, and it's a clear evolution. In Florida 2000, they didn't have control of the White House. They did have control of the Florida governorship with Jeb Bush, who may, by the way, be our next president. I'm sorry. If you want to if you have trouble getting yourself motivated for 2008, say those two words, Jeb Bush, and check your gut. It could happen, and it will happen, or somebody, the equivalent. Well, how about Newt Gingrich? You know, I mean, at least he's got an animal for his first name, but an appropriate animal. So, but the fact of the matter is that this system has serious problems. We will not have a fair election in 2006. We will not have a fair election in 2008. We will not elect Democrats to Congress or change the regime in power without dealing with the electoral issue. I'm telling you right now. I saw it happen in 2008. They had the governorship. They rigged some of the computers. They screwed up some of the butterfly ballots. They played a few games here. They did some intimidation there. And they got the presidency. Over the next 4 years, and Karl Rove is nothing if not thorough, they concocted at least 150 different ways of stealing elections. And we saw them. Ohio is famous as being a test market. We saw them do it in Ohio. We're still uncovering things that they did. We just this week had the Miami County Board of Elections admit that their vote count in 2000 was off by almost 20%. And they're still unraveling this stuff. So you've got to pay attention. Please, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. And it's not going to happen unless we do that. So, there I am back in Columbus. I am a riverkeeper for a small organization, that fights to save Alum Creek. Alum Creek is a tiny little stream that goes through our neighborhood. When I was growing up, I used to walk across it every day. As a kid, I never went down there. It was an open sewer. Today, there are herons, there are carp, there are geese, there are ducks. And yesterday, I was standing on a bridge and I actually saw my first snake. The first thing I thought was, oh, there goes Dick Cheney. But then I realized it was a water snake. And it's the first time I've ever seen a snake in that river. It was absolutely gorgeous. So we are also, after all these years now, you know, when we started with the anti-nuclear movement, we had what was called a Toward Tomorrow fair in Amherst, Massachusetts. And at that fair, we introduced the idea that someday the United States could get its energy from alternative renewable sources. And we were really grasping at straws. I mean, there wasn't a wind power industry. There wasn't much PV, photovoltaic cells. Biofuels were really, really exotic. But Amory Lovins was at this conference, and a guy named William Hieronymus, who was a big windmill pioneer. And it was all very hippy-dippy and kind of, you know, out there stuff. And our argument was, well, if we just take the money going into nuclear plants and put it instead into solar and wind and tidal and all that stuff, well, we get it, right? Well, the money did not really go into alternatives. A lot of money went down the nuclear toilet, but the fact of the matter is that 30 years later, we do have an alternative energy industry. We do have renewables. We do have wind power that is the cheapest form of new electricity generation. We do have photovoltaic cells from companies like Benz that are just about to break through. We have biofuels that are spectacular, that are cheap, that are blowing away the competition. There's a wonderful guy here named Jerry Mander who gave me a grant 3 years ago to write a study of hydrogen, when hydrogen was being hyped. And I sat down to read, and I realized hydrogen is actually overhyped. Because hydrogen's not a fuel, it's a method of carrying energy. It's like electricity, it's a carrier rather than actually a source. And I also realized that reading about this stuff and writing about this stuff really puts you right to sleep. And so I tried to write something that was interesting. I came up with this idea. It's called SOLARTOPIA. And what it is, it's a vision of what the world could look like and frankly will have to look like by the year 2030 after a solar revolution. And I based it, it's a theoretical airplane ride from Hamburg to Honolulu in 2030, and the guy in the airplane, I'm 60 right now, so I figure I got a chance. I'll be 85 in 2030. Maybe I'll make it. Maybe I can be this guy. I don't know. So, but looking down on a planet that has realized that we can't do lunatic things like spend $350 billion trying to get the oil out of Iraq and wasting $1 trillion a year on defense and on the military. What we got to do to save our planet and save our ability to live on this planet is put this money in the technologies that we know will work. The fact of the matter is that 30 years later, thank God for Denmark, thank God for Sanyo, thank God for those solar water heaters in Israel, we have a booming, a powerful, and incredibly profitable renewable energy industry. I just went to the American Wind Energy Association convention of the wind power industry in Pittsburgh, of all places. They have a beautiful convention hall. It's in Pittsburgh. It's actually the most advanced solarized convention hall in the country, amazingly enough, partly because there's a group there called Citizens Power, which has fought for those things. A big part of it is. But I went to my first wind energy conference in Portland, Oregon in 2002. There were 1,900 people there. 1,899 of them were in suits, and I was the guy in blue jeans. But, I thought they'd be all hippies. They're all bankers. If you took the windmills out of the exhibit hall and just had the people that were at the wind energy conference, you'd think it was an international bankers convention. There is so goddamn much money in the wind business, you cannot believe it. It is big, it is powerful, it is profitable, and it is booming at the rate of 35% a year. Now, I believe that there are places where windmills should not go, especially on public land and in public waters. There is no excuse for privately owned wind power projects to be built in public waters or on public land. These things are too profitable. That money belongs to the people. But the fact of the matter is, I'm working with a guy in Minnesota. He's got a community-based energy model where the farmers own the windmills. The money stays in the community. It's spectacular. He's done almost $100 million worth of development of wind power in Minnesota where the money stays with the small communities. There is now a windmill blade factory in Pipestone, Minnesota that's going to employ 180 people. And this is happening all over the country if this administration will get out of the way. But even with them in the way, it's booming. 35% a year. And it has to be the salvation of the industrialization of India and China and the rest of the less developed world, because we cannot have them burning coal, burning oil, and all that other stuff. And the important point is, as Ben can tell you, this technology is not theoretical. This is tangible stuff. This is big business. These machines are very profitable. You know how many people there were at Pittsburgh at this convention after 1900, 4 years ago? There were over 5,000. Next year it'll be in LA. A lot of you can come down. I guarantee there'll be 7,000 there. Right behind it is the American Solar Energy Society, where they have the photovoltaics. Now, photovoltaic cells are made out of silicon. Generally, there's other things they're made out of, but they go on your rooftop. Ben's company makes them into shingles, roofing shingles, so you can build a house. You put the roofing shingles on. The roofing shingles generate the electricity from the house. Can you imagine that? Now, they say it's more expensive, but it's not, because you don't have transmission costs. And you don't have a roof, and you don't have a goddamn meltdown to worry about. What you do have is electricity from your own home. They're now embedding photovoltaics into window glass. You can imagine that these windows would generate the electricity for this room, not 30 or 40 years from now, 3 or 4 years from now. It's happening now. Sanyo, all these other companies, this stuff is here. You know? And if you or your kids, you know, when we were in the 60s, it was all great and all that stuff, but you had to choose between being an activist and poverty, unless you were lucky enough to live on a commune. Today, you can actually go into these industries, or your kids can, and find careers where they're really actually doing good stuff. Now, there's still sharks and backstabbers in the renewable energy industry, just like anything else, but the fact of the matter is that this stuff has reached takeoff, and it's beyond takeoff now, it pays. In SOLARTOPIA, which is going to be real, and which I also have not trademarked, by the way, but you know, I hope it's going to be called SOLARTOPIA or something like that. We will have an energy economy based on 3 legs. Wind power will be huge. I think photovoltaic cells will be even bigger because they can go on every building that's built. And I don't think any building in this country anymore should be built without photovoltaic cells on them. It should be legally required. And the third piece of the pie will be biofuels. Now, right now, we're having ethanol and soy diesel. There's a lot of bad press about ethanol, and it's actually justified. We're using the wrong crop for ethanol. Corn should not be the crop used for ethanol. Doesn't make sense. It's an annual crop. You don't use a crop for fuel that you have to plant every year. You do wind up using almost as much fuel to plant it. But that doesn't mean you don't get ethanol. You get it from other plants. Swallowgrass, switchgrass, Jerusalem artichokes, poplar trees, and dare I say that 4-letter word, hemp. Okay? Which will be for dessert, by the way. Outside on the deck. Hemp is a spectacular plant. It can be used not only for ethanol, but also for diesel fuels. Now they're using soy, again, an annual crop. But even, by the way, even with its limitations, soy diesel is now actually pretty cost competitive, more so than corn-based ethanol. But hemp seeds have tremendous oil in them, so does canola. There are a lot of plants out there that will substitute. And I guarantee you, and within the next 5, 10, 15 years at the most, soy diesel, or rather diesel fuels and ethanol based on crops are going to take over. And you know, there's a whole argument, hybrid cars are nice. It's a nice thing. It's a good move in a lot of ways, but there are problems with hybrid cars. And the biggest problem is we're talking about cars at all. The fact of the matter is that this country had the world's greatest mass transportation system, and it was murdered. This is another one of those conspiracy theories that's absolutely true. You can look at the court case that was held in Los Angeles in the 1950s. We had intra-urban transit in every city in the country. How many of you seen Who Killed Roger Rabbit? A few of you. That's what it's about. It's about the killing of the Red Line in Los Angeles. If you can get through the other stuff, you can figure it out. But the fact of the matter is that Los Angeles, Detroit, Columbus, all these big cities, about 80 of them, had trolley systems, which we now call light rail, but they were trolley systems. They worked beautifully, and the automobile, General Motors, Standard Oil, Firestone Rubber, Pittsburgh Plate and Glass, conspired in the 20s, 30s, and 40s to destroy these mass transit systems. When you hear about the alleged love affair between Americans and their automobiles, it was a shotgun wedding. They murdered the initial bride. Americans love trains. I live in Columbus. We have not had passenger rail service out of Columbus since 1979. Columbus used to be a hub for railroad travel all over the country. My niece rode the last train back from the Muse concerts in New York in 1979. You can't go anywhere out of Columbus. You can't go anywhere inside Columbus on a train of any kind. They just made a decision in Ohio. They widened I-71 between Cleveland and Columbus for $500 million. For $50 million, they could have reinstated train service. They could have run people back and forth between Cleveland and Columbus for free for the next 100 years and still come out ahead. This is a huge decision also we face. There were 2 decisions made in the 20th century which you never hear about, which are the most important decisions made for our natural environment. The first was made in December 1953, when Dwight Eisenhower decided that instead of going solar, and there was a big report done for the Truman administration, instead of going solar, he was going to go with nuclear power, the so-called peaceful atom. That mistake has cost us trillions of dollars and landed us in many cases where we are with our rivers, with our air, with everything else that we deal with, and with our troops in Iraq for the second time. The second decision was the murder of the mass transit system. It's great to have hybrid cars, but we are not going to get to SOLARTOPIA. We're not going to change things really until we reinstate our mass transit system and get that going. Now, and it is entirely possible, as I think you all know. There are a couple other sources of energy that we can do. There's tidal, there's geothermal, there's wave energy. There's a lot of other things out there, industries that are creating, but the one that is, the three that are most important and that you can follow and invest in are wind and biofuels and photovoltaic cells. And we will get there. It can be done, it will be done, and it has to be done. So, to wrap up, the fact of the matter is that I have seen these victories happen, and you've seen these victories happen. As was said before, we know we can make a difference. We are up against it now. This is the very worst regime that we've ever faced. If we can get rid of these guys, if we can reinstate our democratic system, we will have the power, we will have the internal force and the confidence to move this ahead. We were grasping at straws in the 1970s when we said that renewable energy could take the place of nuclear power. We know it happened. It was not a miracle. It was plain dollars and cents, down-to-earth activism and good common understanding of technology. We know we can save every river, every stream, every lake, every body of water on this planet with exactly the same kind of understanding and power and forcefulness. And I look forward to working with you on that. Thank you very much, and I will really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.